That is a massive screen, isn't it? I'm used to we're doing commercials, so I'm looking at everything this size, and suddenly you stick it up there. It's crazy. But yeah, so I'm Chris King, head of 3D at 1920. I'm here with Libby, our studio manager and recruiter, and I'm going to steal about a minute of your time at the start, just to tell you a little bit about 1920 and who we are, because I expect most of you won't know who we are. So I'm just going to play a little video that describes what we do, and it's followed by a short selection from our show reel. Everything in there is simulated, lit and rendered in Houdini and Mantra.
When we created 1920, we decided to do things a little differently. Rather than have everyone based in one large, expensive space in London, we thought we'd spread the workforce over 2 sites. In London, we have a small office for client attend and presentation. In Bristol, we have the engine room, 3 times the size of our London office. When the work comes into London, shots are sent to Bristol using a fast connection. Our 2D and 3D artists work away on the shots and then send them back for approval. With the use of FaceTime and screen sharing, our Bristol office is just like having a second floor in London. Working this way significantly cuts our overheads, and we can pass these savings on to our clients. And with the masses of talent and experience of our crew, you can be guaranteed of receiving the best possible quality and service.
Wasn't expecting applause there, but thanks anyway. I should say, actually, it's not all. 99% was Houdini and Mantra. There were a couple of little bits as I went along there that weren't, but generally that's what we all work in. We sort of model and animate in Maya, and then everything after that is Houdini. So the project I'm going to be focusing on here, you saw a couple of shots at the end, is the KFC Christmas campaign last year. We sort of ventured into creatures at the end of 2016 and did a few in 2017. We did the Royal Marines spider, and then went straight into KFC Christmas. So we've not been doing it particularly long, but we've sort of jumped in the deep end pretty quickly. So I'm just going to go through what the project brief was, the feather problem, as I call it, that we hadn't done feathers before. And how we used Houdini's existing tools and flexibility and adaptability to sort of fill the gaps between them. And that's kind of what we've been doing with Houdini for the last 5 years. So the brief was to create 2 photoreal feathered birds, a Rhode Island red chicken and a black turkey. So they both had different things to think about in terms of the feathers. The chicken tends to have quite a smooth overall effect of the feathers layered together, whereas the turkey just has a crazy mishmash of a million different things going on, and you kind of get this armor-plated effect. So there was different challenges that we had to look at from that point of view. We knew that we were going to have a full range of motion. They were going to have full wing extension and flapping. The turkey was going to do this strutting display where it inflates its feathers. We were going to have full body shots, and we were going to go right into macro detail. We had a 9-week schedule, which included building that feather system, going on a week shoot, and 35 shots. It was a 60-second ad, and we had a team of 5 to do it. myself supervising and doing the R&D, an animator, a rigger and animator, a technical director, and a modeler. So I don't know how you guys feel about that, but it felt pretty tight to me. So yeah, it was our first foray into feathers as a company. Obviously, it was mine as well. I'd done lots of creature work before, but I hadn't actually touched feathers. So the first thing to do was just to work out what we needed to do to achieve the project brief. So I identified these things. It needed to be groomable down to individual feather curvature, I think particularly for the chicken. It needed to be dynamic, and I felt it needed to have flexible feathers as well. It definitely needed to be non-intersecting. It needed to be highly detailed because we were getting so macro, and it needed to render and simulate efficiently. You know, a chicken's got about 8,000 feathers, and potentially with barbs and barbules, you're looking at about 6,000 barbs or barbules on a feather. So it's the amount of geometry is going to shoot up very quickly. So looking at the options we had, you can go textured planes, or you can go full geometry, and you can decide whether you want the feathers to flex or not, or sort of individually flex. There's systems out there that would have static feathers that were groomable, but each individual feather would be static. But I felt that there was potential for us to need to have individual control over each feather. So I had a bit of a look at what I'd done before, and as I say, I was leaning towards a full geometry solution. So what already existed in Houdini, am I going loud and quiet all the time as I turn to the screen? I was trying to get over here. So the Houdini hair tools, we've been using them in Houdini 15, and then into 16, 16.5, and now into 17. Really, really happy with them, to be honest, especially the changes that came through in 16. And we had already used them in production on the muzzles we'd done for BBC and Flash, and we used them on the Spider, and we'd done some internal tests on this squirrel. So we were getting pretty comfortable with the tools. We knew that they were hugely adaptable, customizable. You can get in and out of them, chuck other nodes in there with them, and felt very comfortable going into the project with those tools. And also you have the wire solver on the other end of it to do your dynamics, and all pretty streamlined from that point of view. And you also had the Houdini feather builder. I don't know if any of you guys have used that. I'm sorry, I'm going to struggle to pronounce. Is it Teague? Teague. Brilliant thing for making feathers. So we got straight into using that. And out of that tool, you can get full geometry planes, or you could potentially render them and generate them as textures. But no full feather solution exists currently. I'm hoping for one, but no, nothing currently exists. So what was left? We needed to get those feathers onto the hairs. So the first challenge was I decided to get to build polyplanes along each hair. So we do that by getting a stable orient along each hair segment, then instance a lateral curve per segment. So you can see there you've got the hair in the center, and then I'm just instancing curves along the length of the hair. And then you can just build a polyplane from that curve fairly simply. So at this point, we've got a proxy feather that you can start to do things with. So we start to look at grooming, and at this sort of resolution, things were very interactive. So you could really start the groom in earnest, and that's probably a tenth of the amount of hairs you want. And when you go up to the full 8,000 hairs, obviously things start to chug a little bit, but you're still able to do tweaks. So I was pretty happy with things at that stage, and so now we have a groomable solution. Now I thought this is probably the point to test whether we get away with textures or not. As I said before, my gut feeling was probably not. But so we made some textures and started having a go and seeing what that would be like from a rendering point of view. It seemed we were just burning tons and tons of samples, just calculating alphas on the feathers. There was tricky shader work to do to get the anisotropy and the displacement correct. And the transmission coming through it, and the fact that we were going to get so close and in macro detail just felt like it wasn't going to be the right solution. So I felt I needed something better. So the second challenge was to build the full feathers along the curves. Ideally, I would have done a full curve per barb. So you're literally generating every single hair, but I felt that was probably a render time procedural. There just wasn't enough time to do that. So I came up with the idea of breaking the feather into pack primitives and instancing. It's probably our best chance of building the system in time and having something efficient to render. So how did we do that? I went to the solution I came up with was to instance pack primitive sections along the hair. So first of all, we would build the feather types and normalize their length. So there we have all the feathers that were needed for the chicken. We had further variations on that, but that's the sort of base level. So on the left, we've got primary flight feathers, secondary flight feathers. The green ones are cape feathers on the neck of the chicken, saddle feathers, hock feathers, and tail feathers, and then a lula on the end there. So, but they've all got a normalized length. Then you'd kill the raki or calamus, or the quill in the center of the feather, because we knew we can get that from the hair system. So kill that and then break them into barb segments. So this was constantly driven by the number of segments in the hair system. So on the chicken and the turkey, we were using 8 segments. It was plenty enough to get the detail that we needed. And so I'd break each feather into 8 hair segments like this, going by barb. Then zero the transforms of those, and you'd get something like this. So that's all feathers broken into sections, and zero transformed. And then we would turn that into a pack disk primitive that we would call a feather pack. And so we would be iterating through feather packs, pack disk primitives for feather packs, depending on where we were in production. And we'd have a feather pack for the chicken, feather pack for the turkey. And it was a sort of nice versionable system. And you could hand it from potentially the person grooming to the person rendering. Usually the same person, but you could do that. So in that feather pack, you would also, there's all our feathers coming in, the materials being assigned, things like barb width attributes and things like that being put on there. And then it was a case of instancing those onto the hair points. So you already got the stable orient from the polyplane solution that I had. So we'd just immediately be able to stick these pack primitives onto the chicken and have something that was, I think that's 8,000 hairs and probably 7,000 points, and it was pretty interactive to view in the UI. So we've got a highly detailed solution now. I know we can get really, really close to these things, and it rendered super efficiently because it's packed as primitives, getting really, really good render times. And compared to the solutions we were doing before, just chucking samples through, calculating alphas on the textures, it was just no comparison. And the memory would stay very low as well, so that was good. So yeah, what was left? Dynamics and intersections, the sort of bane of feathers. So yeah, hair simming with a wide hair, just upping the width for collisions, and turning on skin collision does get you a long way. We would groom with as few intersections as possible. The grooming tools are quite, they fit that already quite well. And then we would do the wire sim from the animation mesh, starting from the groom pose. So you try and sort of retain your non-intersection as much as possible. Then post-process the sim to iron out intersections. That was a sort of first bash at trying to get rid of intersections. So you basically, I was looking at 3 feathers, looking at the central feather and saying where was that feather in relation to the other 2 at groom time, and then post-sim just trying to interpolate and get back between those feathers if it could. That was fairly successful, but it did tend to deaden the sim quite a lot. If you're moving things around that much after the sim and getting rid of little intersections, it sort of dulled everything down a little bit. So, and here's some examples of that. So, top left, this unsimmed. Number 2, is simmed, but no collisions turned on. So this is all just hair sim, by the way. 3 and 4 are hair sims with collisions, with post-processing to iron out some of the intersections. So things are getting a lot better, but some slightly strange things are starting to happen on 3 and 4. So slightly concerned at this point, thinking how close we were going to get and not really knowing yet what the chickens and the turkeys were going to do. So I felt we needed to come up with something that was going to give us a reliable non-intersection solution. I thought this is probably going to be pretty good for mid shots. Wide shots obviously probably didn't even need to simulate, but so good for mids. But with these super close-ups where the chicken's turning its head or doing the more extreme movements, I felt like we still needed a solution for that. So what we came up with was treating each feather as a wire mesh. So going back to the polyplanes, we build a simple polyplane and then turn that into wire and then simulate that. And that seemed to work pretty well, to be honest. It was so this thing I'm going to play now was okay. Wow, it goes fast, doesn't it? This is going to. This was 24 hours on a 24-core machine. So for some shots, it was productionable. And you can see they're not really getting many. Shouldn't be getting any intersections and not killing the sim at all. So in a fairly good place. So now we're dynamic and non-intersecting. We could go into production. Some of the extras that we did, we included geometry pickups for feather type, texture, shader width, and that was all paintable within the grooming tools, and you could just pass it straight through to the feathers. Added shader pickups to randomize shader properties by the feather and by barb, and that's sort of already in the hair shader to some extent, but we just appended onto that and added a few extras. Things like the wings, especially around the shoulder area, and the medials, the marginals, too complicated to groom, so modeled that, modeled all the feather layout with proxies, turned that back into a groom, and then groom merged that back into the hair system. Built digital assets for the plane system and the pack perimeter system, so you could pass that off for groom and rendering, and then other things we did were we rigged with the primary secondary feathers, so I got Josh, our rigger, to rig those, and then interpolated some of that movement back into the marginal, so you'd get a consistent wing. Use some of the Houdini Delta Mush stuff in the tricky neck area to smooth the mesh before the feathers were applied. That's definitely on the chicken the trickiest area. There's so much movement in there. And then instant snow onto the feathers and simulated snow blowing through just to sit the chicken and turkey into their environment, and did footprints as well. So these are what we ended up with, and you always want to do things better, but I think we got to a fairly decent solution in the time. So next time, I would definitely try and go full barb growth along the hairs. I think that's worth doing. There were instances, if you looked really detailed, you might just start to see those pack primitive sections. I don't think we saw them in any shots, but I think if certain circumstances happened, you may have seen them. And then, doing that, I'd probably use the template feathers and created in the Houdini feather builder, and use that to decide how many barbs, how long. So you could design your feather and then just pass attributes back to the procedural. And so Houdini 17 was released October. We were delivering this September, October, November. So we're just out of time to use Vellum, and I think I'd definitely give Vellum a go on the interaction for the feathers. So that's us. Thank you very much. Any questions? Is that all right for time?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Good.
I don't think we saw the ad though. Did you?
I didn't actually. I know I didn't include it. It was earlier on, but I didn't include the final ad. I'll post it. I'll post it on.
Okay, it'll be posted. Do you have any questions? Right in the middle here.
Hey, Phil.
Thanks, Chris. Great work. I just have one question. So you were instancing the faceted sections onto the curve, so they were actually faceted rather than deformed at the end, I assume, because
They were, to keep them packed as primitives,
Yeah.
basically had to facet them. And yeah, that's probably the one letdown of the thing, but we sort of put things in place in the shading and the way the groom was done to sort of constantly check that faceting wasn't going to be noticed. And as I said, if certain situations were to have come up, I think we would have struggled a little bit. But all the shots we had when we were going into production, it wasn't going to be a problem, so it was okay. And I think there was always the option as well to break into further facets. Memory was so low on the renders that we were having, we definitely had the opportunity to just break into more facets.
Yeah.
So,
Great, thanks.
Any other questions? Going once, going twice. Oh, here we go.
I second that question.
Are there any plans to do more feather support? Okay.
There's been a lot of talk. There are some ideas. I guess it would be pretty similar to this, but it's not going to be an 18. And I don't know what release it's going to be in. It's going to be in some release in the future. Still 2 digits, I think. Yeah.
And Ty, if you're listening, it was Ty that provided the feather system. And he was an intern at Side Effects last year, I think. So if you're listening, Ty, maybe we'll hire you back and they can work on the feather system. Cool. Well, thank you very much, Chris, for sharing that with us.